Okay, we're good to go.
Okay, well, hi everyone. Welcome to our Democratic Youth Coalition series tonight of candidate meet and greets. Tonight we're meeting with Kendra Hicks, who's running for Boston's 6th district, city council. And thank you all for joining us. And we'll start off with leadership introductions. I'm Tora. I'm the outreach director. As you can tell by my hat, I'm a college student at Purdue University. And I'll pass it over to Ashi.
Hi, thank you so much for being here. I'm Ashi. I'm the chief of staff for the DYC, and I'm also a college student. I study at UC Berkeley.
Hi, I'm Asmithila Heather. I'm the recruiting director, and I'm a high school student in Austin. I'm going to go ahead and get us started. So we are the Democratic Youth Coalition, a grassroots student activist coalition of young Democrats who are working to help elect candidates passionate about serving the American public. The youth vote is extremely important, and our work will ensure that the Democratic Party continues to receive strong youth and student engagement. And now I'm going to pass it off to Ashi.
We're very excited today to introduce Kendra Hicks, City Council candidate for Boston's 6th District. Thank you so much again for being here today, and all of us are so excited to learn more about your platform.
Thank you so much for having me.
So if you want to participate, please turn on your camera, mute if you're not speaking. We will be recording this meeting to post on our social media, so please adjust your cameras accordingly. Finally, we ask that you please do not promote yourselves in the chat of the call. So Kenna, we're going to get started with the questions. Tell us about yourself and how you got involved in politics and why you're running.
Yeah, thanks so much for offering that. And so like you mentioned, I'm running to be District 6 next city council representative, but this isn't really just a political campaign to me. I really do think that we have an opportunity to build together a vision for the future of District 6. And I think that we can make that vision a reality by building our collective power within city council. I have to be honest and say that I never really thought I would run for political office. I'm a first-gen Dominican woman who was raised by a working class immigrant family, and I didn't go to fancy schools or grow up in a big house in a wealthy part of town. And for a long time, that's really what I thought it took to be an elected official, resources and power that I just simply didn't have. And as I grew older, I was really blessed to have elected officials like Felix Arroyo, Charles Yancey, and Chuck Turner standing up for working class people, immigrants, parents, teachers, and young people alike. They were representing people like me. But still, when it came to challenging the status quo, I really watched them struggle to enact change because we just didn't have the numbers or the power. But since then, I really think that the political conditions have shifted dramatically, and many city leaders have paved the way for me and others to continue on their work. They really created a place at the table for people like me, and it's been really an honor for me to carry that mantle with my run for city council.
Our next question would be, what is your stance on paid internships, and will you commit to paying interns on your campaign and in your office?
Yeah, thank you for that question. That's been a really hard question for me. The short answer is yes. I think that my belief is that people should be compensated for their labor. And that we should pay young people interns for their labor. I think the difficulty that we've kind of come across, particularly in a small campaign like a city council campaign in Boston, is that as the candidate, I have to raise every single dollar to pay people and to make sure that we're running a campaign that's both effective, but also is valuing people's labor. It's been really hard to kind of balance those two things. And so what we do right now is that we know that the fact that campaigns, I think campaigns are exploitative in many ways in the amount of work that they really require from people. And so having people do, more than a full-time job worth of labor, particularly as an intern or a fellow, and then not compensating them, I think it's just completely unacceptable. And so we've been able to find a middle ground with our campaign because we know that the fact that campaigns don't pay people makes this kind of work inaccessible to Black and brown young people and to people who are poor and working class folks because they can't afford to work for free. And so we created a program where young people who need to be paid, right? Because they can't afford to work for free, can apply for our fellowships. And so we created like a paid fellowship program and then a separate fellowship, a separate volunteer-based program where young people or fellows who wanted to volunteer for the campaign and didn't need to be paid could do so. They could offer their time. And so the way that we do that right now is that we have a strict 5 to 8 hour kind of commitment that people are making. We're super supportive around boundaries, and we ask people that they take their boundaries specifically because we're not paying them. I think that it's really easy to kind of like throw yourself and invest all of your time and energy when you think you're doing it for a good cause. But even if you're doing it for a good cause, you shouldn't be unclear about your boundaries. And so we're really supportive with our fellows who are not being paid about taking time, setting boundaries of when they're working, when they're not working, and making sure that they're not offering more time that they can, especially if they're not being paid. And our paid fellows, you know, get similar treatment. Same thing, boundaries. We're paying you for this many hours. This is the work that you're doing. If and when you're going over, how do you communicate that, and how do we balance workload? So yeah, so I think that the short answer is yes. I absolutely believe that people should be paid for their labor. If I had unlimited resources, then I would be paying every single person who's doing work for me right now, but we don't. And so we definitely had to find a creative way to make sure that we were engaging young people who are typically not engaged in the political process because they can't afford to work for free.
Right, well, our next question is more so policy based. It's, Kendra, you know this very well. It's an issue that I'm very passionate about. It's disabilities issues. As our next councilwoman, what will you do about disabilities inclusiveness and also accessibility in Massachusetts 6th district?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things that we can do. What we've been doing as we build our policy platform is that we have been meeting with people who are members of the community and who are organizing on specific issues in the community so they can help us build up our policy platform with with issues that are important to them that we know that city council can move forward on a municipal level. And so currently our plan is to talk with disabled folks, people who are organizing and doing this work in the city, to talk about what a policy platform could look like for that. I do think that a lot of the issues that we are currently championing around education and around housing and environmental justice are all intersectional issues. And so I think that all of these things disproportionately impact people who are disabled as well. And so there's work that we can do there. But I am really a proponent of being someone who's taking leadership from the front lines. And so I would like to hear from people in that community first to say, what is most strategic, what is most pressing right now, what are the most pressing issues that they want to focus on so that our policy platform is reflective of the needs of the people who are most impacted.
Thank you for your response. Our next question is, in your opinion, what is the single most important issue your district is facing, and how do you plan on solving it?
The single most important issue. That's hard. I don't think there's a single most important issue. And the reason why I don't think there's a single most important issue is because of what I said in my previous answer, is that all of these systems are interconnected. And, you could say that, environmental justice. I think environmental justice is pretty much the most pressing issue for everyone in the entire world right now, because we're having to make decisions on that are going to impact whether or not our planets and our species survives in the long term ultimately. And so I think that is kind of like the most pressing issue, but also environmental justice is connected to housing, and how we build is connected to transit. And so for me, although that's kind of the overarching issue that's really guiding and pushing everything right now, I think that all of these issues, education, housing, environmental justice, community safety, economic justice, and arts and culture, that all of these issues intersect with one another. And that District 6 is seeing really unique challenges that are at the intersections of all of these policy priorities. But I think if I were to pick one, I would say that environmental justice should be the most pressing issue in all of our minds right now. In terms of our plan for environmental justice, I think at the core of our environmental justice strategy is really accelerating decarbonization. And so right now, Boston has a goal to get to net zero emissions by 2050. And I think that 2050 is too late. And so I think that we have to do more. Right now, 3% of our buildings are responsible for 50% of all the greenhouse gas emissions in the city. And I think that if we really want to be a city that's resilient in the face of climate change, we have to speed up our decarbonization. A way that we can do this, one of the ways that we can do this is by making sure that our large buildings are reaching net zero carbon emissions sooner. And so right now we have something that's called the Berdo Ordinance. And what the Berdo Ordinance does is that it basically it's the Building Energy Reporting and Disclosure Ordinance. And what that ordinance does is that it requires Boston's large and medium buildings to report their annual energy and water use. And it also requires these facilities to complete energy saving actions as well. And so my plan is to work to basically expand that ordinance so that it includes the use of alternative compliance payments, so that these compliance payments can also subsidize decarbonization for small businesses, small landlords, public housing buildings, to really support them in retrofitting their facilities so we can get all of them to net zero as well. So instead of just focusing on our large medium buildings, I think that we need to accelerate decarbonization and make sure that all of our buildings are getting to net zero by 2050 or sooner.
Thank you for that informative response. I know I learned actually a lot about the ordinances thanks to that. So sort of connecting to what you mentioned in your last response, we found it very interesting that an integral part of your platform includes a focus on art. So can you speak a little bit to why art should be paid more attention to and its overall role in the community?
Thanks for asking that question. So I'm an artist, not a trained artist, but definitely an artist by practice, and I have been different mediums for most of my life. And as an organizer, it's become very clear to me that arts and culture and just a creative practice actually is a tool for democracy. Right? It like sustains our movements. It helps people build communities. But I think that if we think creatively about how we activate people, it can help us strengthen our democracy. And so right now in the city, I don't think that we're appropriately investing in our artists or the sustainability of our cultural districts. I definitely think that we have an opportunity to integrate arts into our democratic process. And by doing that, we can engage marginalized communities that are typically not brought into the democratic process. And I think even now with the COVID-19 pandemic, it's really made these realities more evident. And one of the clear examples that we've seen is that there's been a shuttering of like some of our most beloved venues. And there hasn't really been a citywide discussion about how we're going to replace these spaces, which provide lots of, creativity and connection. I think that the work of building community and building a city, right? Like building a city includes building relationships, and it includes like strengthening connection between our neighbors. And that requires a really strong arts and culture scene where people can come and they can connect together. And so I think that we need to plan for cultural spaces just how we plan for housing, for transportation, and for green spaces. And that's my hope, that we can actually get there to create a cultural infrastructure plan for the city so we can bolster support for the places that are struggling because of the pandemic, but also sustain it in the long term and expand it so that it includes and activates more people and more neighborhoods.
Great. Well, thank you, Kendra, for that great response. So our next question is regarding climate change. So this is a big issue, I guess, all across the country. Do you support the Green New Deal?
I do. Yes, I am absolutely in support of the Green New Deal. I don't know how to give a longer answer to that. I think it's a strong yes. Um, I have put included in our policy initiatives is a plan to support a green jobs initiative. So Councillor Michelle Wu has a proposal right now for like what a municipal Green New Deal could look like, and I'm very supportive of that. I think one of the specific parts that I'm supportive of when it comes to a green jobs initiative is banning the use of quarries for determining eligibility for these municipal supported job programs, because I think that if we do that, it's going to really ensure that the programs are delivered equitably and that the people who are going to be most directly impacted by climate change, but also the people who have been the most impacted by over policing in our cities, but also have the least access to good, well-paying jobs, are going to have access to these kind of good jobs when you think about supporting the Green Jobs Initiative. So yes, absolutely in support of it.
And thank you. So our next question is about the death penalty, which is a major issue in our country. What is your stance on the death penalty?
My stance on the death penalty. Is that the death penalty is inhumane. I think that we are, as a society, have to move beyond the need for capital punishment. I think that Massachusetts has done well in getting rid of the death penalty. I think that we should keep it that way. And I think that we should end the death penalty federally as well.
Given the huge disparity between net worth for minority populations compared to white households in Boston, how do you plan on closing sort of the wage gap and promoting an equitable economy that works for everyone?
That's a very good question. Very, very good question. So a couple of things. In Boston, and I'm not sure, I mean, obviously I'm running for city council in Boston, so I wanted to bring this up specifically. A Black family has a median income of $8, and a white family has a median income of $247,000 versus $8 for a Black family. And so I think that that's important to say, because not only is our city extremely segregated, the racial wealth gap is also vast between Black and white families in the city. I'm from the Dominican Republic. Dominican families have a median worth of $0 in comparison to 247,000. And so I think that I think it's just time that we pay really close attention to the racial wealth gap. I think that fundamentally the racial wealth gap doesn't exist for only one reason. I think that the racial wealth gap exists because of wage differentials, because of differentials in incarceration, transit options, health outcomes. And I think that if we take a moment and we're honest about our country's history, the fact that there's generations of stolen labor, 400 years of discriminatory policy towards Black and brown people, and our extractive economy are really why we have such a vast racial wealth gap. And so given that, I think that we can really start by ensuring that we can support communities, right? Like we can support communities financially, we can make sure that people are getting jobs and so on and so forth. But that's only going to do so much to bolster these communities who have been historically and disproportionately marginalized. So I think that if we really want to close the racial wealth gap, we really need to implement policies that give Black and brown people equitable access to these kinds of economic opportunity. But we also have to come to terms with the fact that some of us are going to have to make a commitment to redistributing wealth and resources into these communities, because it's difficult, right? You can give people a place that you think puts them on equal footing, but ultimately with all of that history, right, all of that time lost in terms of economic advancement, you need to do a little bit more than just level the playing field. We need to bolster the support that we're giving to these communities if we want to close the racial wealth gap.
And kind of going off of that, considering the financial toll the pandemic has taken on many families, what has this revealed to you in terms of affordable housing, and what solutions do you see fit moving forward? Unmuted.
So I think one of the things that we have to keep in mind is that the city of Boston has no comprehensive plan for development, right? I think in every instance, constituents have to know how many parcels are being built, what location, when the meetings are happening, how they can give feedback. And I think that these processes are often less invested in really gathering community feedback than on just presenting a plan and kind of moving it forward regardless. There's a need right now for a deeply engaged democratic process that really is going to shape the outcomes of policies based on what the people in this district and the people in this city need and the feedback that they're giving to the developers. Additionally, we have this issue of affordability. And so I think that in the city, what we see is that the vast majority of development isn't affordable, even at a middle class wages, let alone for people who have limited financial resources. And now what we're seeing with COVID-19 is that we're having such a huge economic downturn that the amount of people who have limited financial resources and need stable housing is growing exponentially. And so we have a higher need than we did before the pandemic. And the need before the pandemic was already great. So I think that if we want to see development without displacement in the city, we need to commit to increasing the proportion of income restricted affordable units in the new buildings that we're building all across the city, and make sure that these units are truly affordable, not just affordable at 80% of the area median income. We need to look seriously at rent control, and we need to start expanding community land trust so that we can build sustainable, affordable housing in neighborhoods that are controlled and ran by the people who live there.
Finally, a lot of people here want to get involved in local politics, but are unsure where to start. What can young people who want to increase their participation in politics do in your district or on your campaign?
I think for the best advice that I could give young people who want to increase their participation in politics is to not start with electoral politics. My suggestion to people who want to get more involved in politics in their community is to find your local organizations, find the nonprofit groups, find the community groups who are organizing, who are building campaigns, who are made up of the people who live in these communities and who are fighting for these policies on the ground. Find those groups, volunteer your time there, get to know them, organize for them, find mutual aid groups, figure out how you can serve there. And that's where you should start. I think from there, once you get on the ground, obviously these things don't have to happen separately. They can happen parallel. You can work on electoral politics, volunteer on campaigns, but also organizing at the same time. I don't think there's one way to get to the world that we're trying to build. I think that there are multiple ways to do it, but I think that it's much easier to start doing this work in community, doing organizing work really on the ground and moving some of those policies along in solidarity with other people who are also struggling with these issues. If you want to get involved with our campaign, you can visit our website, and there's a volunteer form there. You can sign up for our volunteer form. We have phone banks that happen on Thursday nights and on Saturdays. We would love any and all support that anyone can give us. And if you're at the point where you want to do some community organizing, on our website, we have the D6 Giving Guide that has not an exhaustive list, but it has a lot of local organizations who are doing movement building work and who are organizing. You can find them there. You can get in contact with them, and you can start working on some campaigns on the ground as well.
Great, thank you. And we will now be opening the floor for audience questions. Just as a reminder, if you want to ask a question, please turn on your video and unmute yourself, and you can also type your questions in the chat. One of our representatives will read it out for you.
Good evening. Good evening.
Hi, yeah, you can go ahead and ask your question.
Good, okay. Go ahead, okay.
Mhm.
Ms. Hicks, I'm viewing here from Baltimore, Maryland. One of the things that you said to me, I had several questions, but one of the things you said to me that piqued my interest was you talked about the cultural side of Boston. And being an organist myself, I'm a pianist as well, pianist organist. Everybody knows that Boston, as we call it, is very well known for its culture, its architecture, the rotaries, all of the colleges, School of Music and things there. Here in Baltimore, we have something called Artscape every year, which is held about, in July. There's a couple city blocks that are cut off, and artists can come and exhibit their drawings and things of that nature. There's always an artist giving music and things of that nature. It's just a great big thing that goes on here in Baltimore. And I just wanted to know a little bit about the dynamics of District 6. If you could tell a little bit.
Sure. So District 6 is actually a vibrant district when it comes to our arts and culture. There are numerous festivals happening here. We have the Lantern Parade that happens at a pond that's distance from my house. The Beer Festival, which also happens every year and is a celebration of a fight that the people in this neighborhood won against the highway. There was a highway that was meant to cut through this neighborhood. Fought against the highway and they run, and so we have the Wake Up the Earth Festival, and that festival is the fact that we don't have a highway cutting through our neighborhood, and that the people fought and won that fight. And we have festivals. We have cultural festivals for Dominicans, for Puerto Ricans, for Caribbean people. We have festivals that happen all across the city, not just here in District 6. On top of that, the Avenue of the Americas is here. And so the Avenue of the Americas is considered to be the city's Latin quarters. And so the Latin quarters are also here in this neighborhood. And so all of those things are concentrated here in this district. And so District 6 is a very creative and culturally vibrant district.
Sounds diverse as well.
It was. I think like a lot of neighborhoods, District 6 has been a victim of very rapid gentrification in the past 10 years.
Okay.
So, although it used to be a really diverse neighborhood, I grew up here, I've been living here my whole life. It used to be a really diverse neighborhood. And in some ways it still is, but right now it's definitely less so.
Okay. The only thing I know about Boston is Roxbury. That's what I'm familiar with. I've heard talk about it. Is that your district? Is that
Roxbury that is big, but Roxbury is the neighborhood that's right next to Jamaica Plain, which is where I live.
okay?
It's also the historically Black neighborhood.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, thank you for your questions. Tura with closing remarks.
Great. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today, all the participants. And thank you, Kendra, so much for your time and joining us today. We really appreciated speaking to you today and hearing about your platform and your campaign. If folks would like to get involved, a member of our team just posted information about our organization. And we'd love for you guys to get involved and join our organization in some capacity. Thank you so much for joining us and have a wonderful day, a wonderful evening.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thanks for having me. Have a good night.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.